Today's video we'll be looking at my newest high-end 286 build.
We review old technology from games to old PCs, and don't forget the toys. So get ancient electronics, we cover it all.
I feel like I've gone through a period in my retro collecting, retro PC collecting, that the 286, both processors and the boards, they seem to be rare as hen's teeth. I never would come across them. I would come across Socket 7, newer stuff, of course, 46 boards, 386, even 8088, but 286 boards always eluded me. But they always interested me for whatever reason. And, I mean, the 286, when you're in the retro gaming, retro PC community, it really feels like a strange place, in the lineup of retro computers. It's not really necessary. I think you could argue that you might really want an 8088 based machine in your collection to play those few stubborn games that really are best on CGA and maybe really demand like a stock 8088 speed, or they run too fast. But it's really hard to make an argument for a 286 in your setup. Generally, a 386 will do everything a 286 can, just a little better. In some cases, maybe a little worse when we're talking about CAD and whatnot, but generally, you can just get a 386. You can definitely get away without having a 286 in your retro PC collection lineup. But I don't know, they've always interested me, and I've always kind of wanted one to fill a sort of EGA niche. I always just wanted like a 286 with a nice true EGA monitor, just to play all my EGA games on. I don't know, that's always been a personal goal build for me, and lately I've come across a lot more 286 stuff, and not too long ago I did a video on my DTK 286, and that was kind of has been my flagship 286 build. But there were just a few minor little issues I had with that DTK machine that I just would have preferred done a little bit better. The first is the memory. That machine had a total of 1 megabyte on board through, I believe, DIP RAM in there, and that's fine. I ended up throwing in an Intel above board, and I upped the memory to 3 megabytes, and that was fine. But really, I would have preferred maybe a board that had either zip sockets, or preferably would take just regular 30-pin RAM sticks. Minor issue, but it was a small issue. The other thing is that board maxed out at a 12 megahertz 286. Now, I have featured on this channel before my Harris 286 machine that was 20 megahertz. That was always a little too fast for me. 12 megahertz was almost there, but I always really just wanted a 16 megahertz 286. I don't know, that just kind of felt like the pinnacle. I mean, obviously a 20 and 25 megahertz was the pinnacle of 286, but 16 megahertz just always felt right. So those were my two gripes. Recently I have come across a 286 board, I'll be showing you in a minute, that actually fixes all those issues. So after acquiring this case very recently, I have decided to embark on another journey and build my personal 286 build that I've always kind of wanted to have. Join me on this journey here. We'll start off, I will talk to you about this case I picked up, and then I will show you the motherboard, and then we'll go from there. I probably won't be going into excruciating detail with the expansion cards, since to be honest, most of the internals, such as the sound card, the hard drive controller card, the video card, those things are probably all just going to be transplanted over from my DTK build. So I strongly encourage you to maybe watch that video before you watch this one. I'll put a link maybe in the description. There'll definitely be one at the end of the video anyways, but I'd probably watch that one first. So just fair warning, I'm probably not going to go into really deep detail with the expansion cards I'm going to put in this guy. So this is the case I'm going to be going with for our new 286 build. It's a very small, compact case. I kind of like it. I like that it's small. The footprint, it's actually even slightly smaller than that DTK computer case that is currently my flagship 286. So it's actually a little bit smaller than that. It might be like a tad taller. But when you see the motherboard that I plan to put in here, I think it fits perfectly with this case and the size of this case. The only issue I might have with the size is the monitor. That EGA, that Princeton EGA monitor, is probably just as wide as this case. So it might look a little bit silly, but I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe it will look fine. I know when that EGA monitor is sitting on that DTK computer case, it looks a little weird. It looks like extra large, but I don't know, maybe it will look fine. But really it meets all my needs. As you can see, there's actually no drives in here yet, but we have 3 5¼ inch drives, and then we have 1 3½ inch bay, not drives. But that's more than enough. Obviously I'm going to put a 1.44 megabyte floppy drive here, 1.2 megabyte 5¼ inch floppy drive, and in a controversial move, yeah, I might throw on a CD drive. I'm not going to go into that again, but I am an advocate for CD drives in 286s, unless you're really going strictly period correct. It's just added convenience. The aesthetics of this case pretty much, fit the bill. I like the power switch here on the front, nice big power switch, a little bit easier to access than when it's on the side or something like that. We have HDD, hard drive activity light, turbo light, and a power light. I hope they work. Haven't tested them yet. Turbo button, reset button. Looks like gee, what do you call those? Looks like now and later form factor. Those little candies are like oversized Tic Tacs. Key lock, and then the front AT keyboard connector. I actually don't like it when the keyboard connector's on the front, but we don't actually have to use this. There's a little connector on this that goes back and it wraps around, and I think it connects to your AT connector on the motherboard. But you don't have to connect that. You can still just connect it on the back. So I guess it's just like an option to have. The only thing this case is missing is maybe like an LED display. Would have been nice. I would have maybe liked a little tiny LED display right here, but I always like LED displays on my old cases, so even my new cases, I just like LED megahertz displays, so that's just going to be a complaint whenever there isn't one. Not a big deal though. There is like a crack right here. I don't know if the previous owner was like going to saw this out. You'll see why I think that in a minute. That I don't think this is natural. Maybe the previous owner was trying to do something. It's not too noticeable, but it is there. So let me flip this thing around and let me show you what I mean by this may have been the previous owner. Alright, so here's the back of the case, and right away you can tell this thing was mangled, and apparently it was mangled by the previous owner. So actually when I received this case, the motherboard in there was actually an AT motherboard. It was a Pentium class motherboard, socket 7, and obviously right here this would have been probably like a lot of metal, and there would have been a round connector for a round spot for an AT keyboard. And obviously, as you can see, the previous owner cut this out so it could fit a AT style, or an ATX style motherboard that had PS2 connectors. I guess at least he had the sense to use electrical tape to put around it, probably because it's sharp-ish edges from the cutting. It annoys me, yes, but I think it's still usable. I don't think it's going to interfere with it putting in the AT keyboard, and it's on the back of the case, so me or anyone else does not have to look at it. So hopefully we can just kind of forget that that is the case, or the situation with this case. I'm going to have to find, I actually don't think I have an appropriate AT power supply right now, so I'm going to have to find one of those, or maybe I can find a the right form factor ATX power supply and use an adapter, maybe something like that. Looking inside the case, nothing too special. Here is that connector I told you about. So basically this should go around, like if the motherboard's in here, and you would kind of wrap this around or snake it around and connect it to the AT keyboard port on your motherboard, and then it would kind of route it through to that connector on the front. But we don't have to use this, and I probably won't. Looks like most or all of the little connectors are here. It's just none of them are labeled though, so whenever I set up the motherboard, there will be a little bit of detective work going on to figure out which of these does which. Although I'm pretty sure this is to the speaker, which I actually don't see a PC speaker. I'm trying to look in there. I actually don't see a PC speaker in this thing, so I don't know where that's going. I don't know. I should probably take this front off and just have a little peek. Alright, I can confirm there actually is a little PC speaker. It's right about here. It is rather small though, but at least it's there. And here is the 286 motherboard I am going with. As you can see, this is quite a small board. This is a later 286 board, very integrated, and it has a couple features that you really won't find on earlier 286 boards. Specifically, this is a 286 12/16E motherboard revision B. Well, other than its small size and integrated nature, there's a couple features on this board that I really like, and that kind of prompted me to build another 286 build, even though I have that DTK 286 that I really like. But this board has two advantages. First of all is the CPU, where the DTK CPU is a 12 megahertz that can downclock to 8 megahertz. This one here is a full 16 megahertz, and I believe, I haven't tested it yet, but I believe it will downclock to 12 megahertz, although I haven't confirmed that yet. I just really wanted a 16 megahertz CPU. I kind of think that's the pinnacle of the 286. There are faster ones. I have a 20 megahertz Harris 286, but when you get to the 20 and 25 megahertz 286s, it just feels like you may as well go with a 386. It just doesn't feel as 286y, if that makes sense. So, in my opinion, the 12 and 16 megahertz are really the pinnacle of 286 CPUs, but I really wanted a 16 megahertz. I just wanted that little bit of extra juice or power, because I really want my 286 to just be my EGA machine, and I want it to be able to run the vast majority of EGA games well. And I think I can get that with the 16 megahertz 286, but we'll see. I do like having that little bit of extra power over the 12 megahertz. Right here, there's a socket for a 287. I'll be taking most of the parts from my DTK build and transferring them to this build. We have a Headland chip right here. That's really other than the CPU, that's really the only other large chip that's kind of soldered on the board. We have a couple chips here. I believe one or both of these is the BIOS, and then we have another chip here. I think this is the keyboard or the I/O controller chip, and a couple more chips here. AT power connector. Here's the AT keyboard connector. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Very standard. 2 8-bit or 3 8-bit, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 16-bit ISA slots. So the other big advantage this board has over the one in my DTK 286 is RAM. So this board has 4 RAM slots for 30-pin RAM, and it can accept up to 4 megabytes on the board. Really, you're fine with 1 or 2 megabytes, but 4, why not? I believe on my DTK there's 1 megabyte on board, and I think it's through like DIMM chips on the board. And then I added, I think, 2 more megabytes on top of that, but I had to use a card, so like a RAM expansion ISA card, an Intel above card. So now I can take that card out and I can maybe use it in another build instead. So yeah, I just really like the convenience of this. And another cool thing is, like I said, it just uses standard 30-pin sockets here, 30-pin RAM. I have seen some 286 boards that use the zip RAM, I think, where it's got like a bunch of little legs, and it's just a little bit harder to find than this just standard RAM. So I like that it's standard RAM. And I am aware I will probably have people telling me 4 megabytes in a 286 is overkill. And that is correct. You're perfectly fine with 1 megabyte in a 286 class machine, and 2 megabytes would be considered pretty high end, and I don't think you would really need any more than 2 megabytes in a 286. But the 4 megabytes isn't really hurting anything, and it's kind of cool to max it out, so we're going with 4 megabytes. So it's just, yeah, it's just all on the board. It's just a lot nicer, and it's just a lot more integrated. Now compare that small kind of streamlined 286 board to this board. Apparently this was Greg's 286 board. But this is an earlier 286 board, and you can see the difference is quite striking. This one's quite a bit bigger, and it's just covered in chips. Just completely covered in chips. It uses these kind of CPU form factors. I don't see this very often. It's not pins, and you just kind of put this in that socket, and then you lock it down, and then it's installed. This is the CPU that came in it. This is a 12 megahertz 286. I've actually never gotten this board to work for whatever reasons. I haven't troubleshooted it too much, but yeah, I was never able to get this board to work. But you can see the stark difference between this board and a later 286 board like the one we're using in my newest 286 build. But it's just chips everywhere. This whole surface is just covered with chips doing, I don't know, various things. Okay, so I have the board installed. As you can see, it's a nice size for this case. So I think it works really good. It's a nice small board. It's a nice small case. I've got most of these things hooked up here, so I got the reset working. Seems like the turbo switch and light are working, although I haven't been able to confirm that. I got the power. Actually, the green power LED was actually, the LED itself was either burned out or just broke. Somehow, I very rarely I see that. Thankfully, I had a replacement, so I was able to kind of swap that out. One thing is, I was completely out of AT power supplies, so I had to use an ATX power supply, which actually is generally, I mean, there are benefits to that. It's newer. And I used one of these little adapters, the ATX, or AT to ATX adapter, and it hooks to the front here. I have installed a 1.44 megabyte floppy drive, haven't tested it yet. The downside with this adapter is it doesn't supply negative 5 volts. So actually I think that's a thing with the later just ATX power supplies. At least the later ones do not supply negative 5 volts. That can be a problem when we're working with a machine as old as like a 286 around that era, because there are, and even later, because there are a number of ISA cards that require negative 5 volts. Certain like MPU MIDI controllers, I believe certain sound cards, certain sound blasters, Pro Audio Spectrums, a number of cards. So we're just going to transfer what I can from my DTK 286. Hope it works. If it doesn't, I did order a voltage blaster, which is a little card that I believe goes into an ISA slot, and it does its magic, and it will provide negative 5 volts. So if we do encounter any problems, I should be getting that in the mail hopefully within a week, and then I can just install that, and that should solve the negative 5 volt issue. You know, I will be transferring all those cards over. I'll be transferring over the FPU. So that's going to be my next step, is just getting in something to run this floppy drive, so I can load up some diagnostic utilities on the floppy and just make sure everything looks good, and then I can start transferring all the cards over. Okay, that EIDE controller did actually have a floppy controller on it, but no I/O, so that's good. I'll just install this, and then I can use this for my hard drive and floppies, but I am going to have to put in a separate card for like serial and parallel ports. If you're wondering, this is just a generic, this is a Trident card, VGA, it's just a placeholder so I can use this with my VGA monitor. Once I have everything set up, this goes out and then the EGA card goes in. So as for I/O cards, I just went with this very simple card here. It's just an 8-bit card. It just has a simple serial and parallel port. That's really all I needed for this machine. I actually tried a few other ones that were a little bit more advanced than this, and for whatever reason, the machine just wasn't detecting the ports. I even played with the jumpers and switches, but I installed this one and it seemed to work just fine with no problems. I think you can actually even add more, probably like a game port or something like that, maybe even another serial port. But this is really all I need. I really just wanted that serial port for a mouse, so I'm perfectly happy with this pretty simple 8-bit I/O card. So because I got a little too excited, I kind of put this machine together before I was able to show off my 2 sound cards in here. I'm just going to show footage from my DTK 286 video because these are the exact same cards. I just transferred them to this new 286. So for the sound card, I'm going with a Sound Blaster 1.5. It has the CMS or Creative Music System chip. So with this card, it meets the time, the era, about 1990-ish, give or take. It's a good sound card, good fit for this machine. It does AdLib, it does Sound Blaster, and it does most of the games if I wanted to use Creative Music System. So it's a good fit for this. It's a good fit for this machine, and all around, it's a pretty good sound card. Now, to interface with outside MIDI devices, I am using a Music Quest card. I guess it's kind of like a clone of the Roland MPU. This is a pretty good card. It does support intelligent mode, so all those games from the period that use intelligent mode should work fine with this card. And there is a lot of games, like EGA games, from the 90s or late 80s that use the MT32. So I'm going to be probably using the MT32 MIDI box with this machine a lot. So I wanted a dedicated MIDI card that I could use. So yeah, I'll be using this card for all my external MIDI needs, and it should work just fine. So here is the EGA card I've been using for quite some time now. This is an ATI EGA Wonder 800. This is a pretty fast, high-end EGA card. I've used this in a couple of my 286s, and I used this in my last main 286, the DTK running at 12 megahertz, and it's run very well. When I was taking this out of my DTK and installing it in my new 286, I noticed something, and that was the BIOS. If you'll see here, it says on the BIOS EGA 480. So I did a little bit of investigation, and I'm actually surprised. I have a lot of eagle-eyed viewers, and I'm surprised in my earlier videos no one maybe pointed out this BIOS that I didn't seem to notice. So doing a little research, I actually am still a little confused on what card this could be. So if you look at Wikipedia, they have 2 pictures. They have a picture of the EGA Wonder 800 and the EGA 480. Now the 480 is missing these 2 EGA kind of feature connectors here and here. One of these is supposedly composite. So those are gone on the EGA 480. And most of these jumpers were gone too. There was only like 1 jumper, but other than that it pretty much looked the same. Now obviously this card has the feature connectors. It has all the jumpers here. But but their picture of the EGA 480 they had also said EGA Wonder 800. And the picture of the EGA Wonder 800 that they had just said EGA Wonder. Now I know there's probably many revisions of this card, but I'm just a little bit unsure of what this is. I suppose this could have been an EGA Wonder 800, and maybe the BIOS failed or went bad, and the previous owner replaced it with an earlier BIOS from an EGA Wonder 480, or maybe this is just an EGA Wonder 480 that happens to have the feature connectors. I'm not sure. When I install and run this card on startup in the BIOS, it does say EGA 480. So even if it is an EGA Wonder 800, it might be limited in its capabilities to an EGA 480. So I don't know. I'm a little unsure what this card is. If it is an EGA 480, that could be why it wasn't running the EGA high-res mode games, because from what I can tell, the EGA 480 can't run those games, which is unfortunate. So this card has served me well as a general purpose EGA card. It should be just fine. So I'm going to be keeping an eye out for maybe a better one, maybe even the EGA 800 BIOS. I'm not sure, but this is fine for now. I will keep using this, but yeah, it's a little bit of a mystery with this card. Now, I did have another EGA card, and this is this guy here, and this is from Paradise. Now, I did install and try out this card, and it did run and display just fine, but doing benchmarks, I ran Check It, and I ran Landmark 2.0 and Landmark 6.0, and this was noticeably slower in the benchmark. So I think I'm just going to continue to go with my ATI EGA Wonder card, regardless if it's a 480 or an 800. It seems to be a little bit faster than this guy here. Okay, we're almost set up here. If you look, it's pretty dark. I did install the FPU unit, so the math coprocessor right there. I have some old footage of that too I can show. It is an ITT 20 megahertz math coprocessor. That's another transplant from the DTK, which even before that was in a different machine. Its speed's rated a little bit higher than the 16 megahertz this is running at, but that's fine. It just gives us a little bit of overhead. And generally those non-Intel FPU chips, math coprocessors of this period, they tend to be a little bit faster than the Intel chip. So the ITT, I believe, should be a bit faster doing the floating point calculations than the actual Intel 287, or I think AMD made a 287 as well. But yeah, it should be pretty a little bit speedier, not that we'll be making much use out of it. If we look right there, I do have the voltage blaster installed and running, since I do have some spare slots. I don't think any of these cards actually require it. I believe this is a Sound Blaster 1.5, so I don't think it's going to have issues. I don't think it needs the negative 5 volt voltage, but I will just throw it in there just because I have it. I don't think it doesn't hurt anything being in there, and it eliminates one issue that if we run into an issue, well, I know it can't be the voltage issue because I have a voltage blaster in there. So I'm just going to keep it installed for now. So here's the build. Of course, you already kind of got a sneak peek at it in the intro, but it's more or less together and working. There's a few issues we're going to take a look at when we look at some gameplay, and I turn it on and we take a look at it, but it's more or less up and functioning. I'm not 100% sure how I feel about these aesthetics. It is a little bit goofy, in my opinion, that the monitor is like just as wide and lengthy as the case, so it just looks a little awkward. Traditionally, usually when you have the desktops, they're a little bigger, so I don't know how I feel about it aesthetically, because it kind of looks weird and kind of goofy. But then again, I also kind of like it. It also looks very sort of space efficient. It almost looks like some of those all-in-ones, like a weird IBM version of a chunky IBM version of or an IBM compatible version of like an all-in-one. I don't know. I don't know. I have very mixed feelings on this this combo and how it looks. On the sides, I've got these are like NEC speakers. They're nothing like special. I picked these up because, you know, they were NEC branded. I thought they'd look cool paired with one of my PC98s. I'll do a video on those eventually. But anyways, they're not set up right now, so I'm using these speakers. I might replace them down the road. This is probably going to be like a semi-permanent setup here, at least until I move, which may be coming up in the future. But yeah, the speakers are okay. Like I said, there's nothing special about them. They do their job outputting the ad-lib and the Sound Blaster sound. Got the little keyboard here. I got one of these. I love these little, I don't know what you call these, little keyboard things where it's metal. Maybe not as quality as like the older ones that were actually built in the 80s, because I have one that I actually think is from the 80s, and it's a little bit more solid. But this will still handle some weight. I love these things though. You can put them on a desk and it gives you a little keyboard tray there, so that's really cool. But yeah, this is the setup. We've got our Of course, the Princeton EGA monitor. I threw in that EGA card. I love this monitor. I can't express how much I love this monitor. It looks great. Mainly a recap down the road. It looks great, but the brightness is turned up pretty high for you to get really any kind of acceptable image. So I'm sure that's wearing on it. So I'm sure a recap would help. But last video I did on the DTK 286, I found out that I believe this monitor is actually a little bit better than the IBM version. It's a little bit better dot pitch, so you get a slightly better image quality from this monitor. So I love this monitor. It's a great EGA monitor. Very rare though, so good luck finding one, but I hope you do if you are looking. But if you see one for a reasonable price, grab it, because these are awesome for EGA. Alright, so this is the setup, and let's take a look at it in action. Play some games, take a look, and you can see how it's running. It's not perfect, but right here I like my little setup here. I have my CGA setup with the Tandy 1000, CGA monitor with that AMDEC monitor, and then right here I have the 486, and I've got our nice Sony G420 VGA monitor, and then over here we've got the 286 with the EGA monitor. So I suppose the EGA system should be there if we wanted to do it in order from oldest to newest standard, but it works. It's still pretty cool. And I should note that I'm not necessarily going with like a period correct build here, but I am kind of going with 1990 as kind of my base year. I don't want to stray too far from 1990 as far as components go, and I think I've met that date pretty well. I believe this motherboard and its BIOS is from 1990. And 1990, you know, it would still be very common to see a 286, especially this kind of a higher end 286 running. There are a lot of games that from like 1990, give or take a few years, that run very well on this machine. So yeah, I'm kind of shooting for like a 1990-ish build here, but again, I'm not doing a strictly period correct build here, or strictly 1990 build, but that's just kind of what we're shooting for. This is the breakdown in the, I went into the setup, the BIOS CMOS setup. Here is, we have extended memory, we have 2 megabytes, and of course the base memory is eating 640, so those two together, a little under our 3 megabytes. And then right here there's an option to set EMS, I believe EMS memory size, and I put 1 megabyte into it because why not? I mean, as I said before, realistically, 2 megabytes max is more than enough for 286, so why not play around with some of that other memory? Don't know if I'd ever use it or need it or anything, but why not? There are a couple other options in here that I'm not sure of. We have BIOS shadow option, and I'm not 100% sure what that does. I think it like shadows the BIOS in memory, and it might speed certain operations up. It might be worth enabling, but I don't know. Things seem to be running fine just now, so I might leave that alone. I also have memory relocation. That's disabled. Not 100% what that does, actually. Well, actually, it tells me right here. It says when it's enabled, unused shadow RAM relocated above 1 megabyte. And when it's disabled, the RAM is not relocated above 1 megabyte. I'm not sure what that's going to do. I'm not sure if that will speed things up or if that will introduce any possible instability or not. I'm not sure. But for right now, I'll just leave it as disabled. But if you guys tell me different in the comment section, if you think I should enable either of these, let me know. And I'll go back and I'll enable them after the video gets released. Right. So we are up and running. We're into the operating system. I have DOS 5.0 installed on here just because it's a 1990-ish 287 build. Sometimes you get tired of running DOS 6.22 on everything, so why not? DOS 5.0. It works fine. I have encountered some issues. The first one is with a very specific game that I've never had an issue with before, and I don't know why it's doing that. Now, I'll show you that in a moment. But the one issue I am having is with floppy drives, at least with the 1.44 megabyte drive. I've had trouble with floppy drives in 286 systems in the past. I don't know why. It's just, I don't know. I've just had weird issues dealing with floppy, specifically like high density type floppy drives in 286 systems in the past. I don't know why it's a thing, but this one's pretty weird. Let's say, for example, I put in Thexter on the floppy disk and I run the game and it runs just fine. And I play Thexter for 30 minutes, get tired of it, quit back to DOS, pull the disk out, and I say, I'm going to try a different game. I'll put in a disk for Leisure Suit Larry. And I'll run it, and it will start reading the disk, and then it will fail. I'm like, that's weird. And then I will run the directory command to look at the disk, and what will come up on the screen is the directory for Thexter. So I don't know what's going on there, and then if I reset the computer or turn it off and back on, and then I put in Leisure Suit Larry, it will run it just fine. It will see the game on the disk, it will read the directory, and it will play the game. But for whatever reason in its memory, it's holding whatever the last disk that was ran in there. It's very strange. I don't know for sure what is going on there. I mean, it's not a huge deal. I can just kind of install everything to the hard drive and run it from the hard drive and it runs fine. But if I try to run a game like from the floppy disk drive, like one after the other, the second one will have issues and the machine thinks the first disk is still in there. It's very strange. Alright, let's do a little test. So I just ran Thexter and I ran the dir command, and this is what's on the Thexter floppy drive. Now let me eject this, and let's put in the disk for Prince of Persia, and let's see what happens. So I'm going to run the directory command, and let's see what it sees. Well, I think it might have worked this time. No, look! Thexter. So yeah, I don't know why it's doing that. This is not the Thexter floppy disk. Yeah, so obviously if I try to run Prince of Persia, I think the command is just Prince. It's gonna try, but then I'm gonna get a bad command or file name because for some reason it still thinks Thexter is the floppy disk that's in there. So I don't know what's going on with that. Okay, so I'm not sure what I've been smoking or something, but when I was talking about the whole disk drive issue not being that big of a deal, I kind of forgot a very, very, very big part of these machines, and that is installing games and installing to the hard drive. And that's especially relevant when you have a game that's like 9 disks. That's the problem when it will only read one disk and have an issue with anything after the first disk. I don't know how that slipped my mind. So that's a very, very, very big problem if it's not going to read anything past the first disk and you have to reset. I don't think it's even going to work that way. Now I did remember I have actually installed a multi-disc game on this setup, and it was Secrets of the Silver Blades, and those were on 5 1/4 inch floppy disks, and that worked without any issue. So this disk drive is doing fine, but for some reason this one is not. I don't think it's not the drive itself, because I have tried multiple drives. First of all, this drive is working fine in a previous build, and then I have tried 2 different drives in this and it's the same issue. So I don't know, it's some kind of issue with the controller maybe when it comes to these 1.44 megabyte disks. I don't know. So I'm installing Quest for Glory 2 right now, or trying to, Trial by Fire, and it just went through disk 1 and now it's asking for disk 2. So let's just see if it works. Just out of curiosity, or if I get that issue again. So this is disk 2. So it's in good. It's in there real good. Fingers crossed. Seems like it's trying to do something. I mean, installing a game on these old machines that's 9 floppy disks, like even in a setup that's completely working, is kind of a pain, and it's nail biting because these discs are quite old at this point, and one of them can have an error. You might get through 5 or 6, and then maybe disc 7 gives you an issue, and then you have to run online and you have to find a copy and download that special disc and write a new disc, and it's a pain in the butt. It's please insert disc 3. Okay, so it seems to be working. It's okay. That's a good thing. I don't know. I don't know why sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So this seems to be working fine with the install here, so that's very good, although I am fully expecting one of these discs to throw some kind of can't read or some kind of corruption error, but we'll see. Alright, we did get a read error. We're at disk 5, and I did get a general failure, but I popped the disk out and reinserted it, and it seems to be reading it now, so looks like we're getting past disk 5 here, going on to disk 6. If it successfully finishes reading, this is quite riveting and nail-biting. Disk 6. Okay, I'll keep you updated if I run into more issues. Sorry, just realized that light was on behind me and it was giving a horrible glare. Anyways, we have made it to disk 9, the final disk. This is absolutely riveting and nail-biting stuff here. So let's see. Only one issue so far, and that was thankfully corrected. So let's see if we can make it through this last disk. I do have a theory that maybe it's the quality of the discs. These are like official written discs from Sierra, and the ones that seem to have been giving me issues are, you know, just ones that I kind of copied off the internet. So maybe they're not quite as well, the quality isn't quite there and it's causing the issues. I'm not sure, but anyways, disk 9, here we go. Okay, that's a good sound. When it's, you know, making the normal reading sounds, that is good. So might actually get this game installed. That would be wonderful. And holy moly, it looks like it actually installed all 9 discs. So that is a very, very good thing. I am happy. Alright, so here is Iron Man Off-Road Racing. I've used this game as kind of a test many times on this channel before, and I've run it on faster and slower machines. I have run this thing on 12 megahertz 286s, 20 megahertz 286, 8086s, 8088s. It's always run fine. But let me show you what it does on this machine. So I'm going to pick Ad-Lib Sound. Well, let me turn on the speakers. Alright, so let's take a look and a listen to Iron Man Off-Road running on the 16 megahertz 286 build. Alright, let me turn the speakers off here. So right away, that doesn't sound right. It's running very slow. And if we actually go into the game running, you can see that for whatever reason, it's running slow. And here we go with it running, and obviously you can see it is running quite slow. Now right now it's in standard EGA mode. I've tried this in CGA mode. I thought maybe it could be an issue with the video card, but no. And let me deturbo it. So right now it's running in 16 megahertz mode. So I will deturbo it, and so it should be running slower now, and no change. So it seems to only be affecting this game, and I don't really know why. So let's take a look at check it. I'm not sure what version this is. 2.1. So I don't know if you caught that. I think I clicked the button too quick, but yeah, everything is detected. It should be running okay. Let's look here at sysinfo. Now, even though in the BIOS I allocated, I think 1 megabyte to expanded memory, I don't have any drivers installed. So I believe in a system like this you do need to have some kind of EMS driver, which I currently do not have one installed. So that memory is doing nothing at the moment, but it does see our base, well, 640 here. It says 638K, and then we have extended memory of 2 megabytes. That's more than enough for anything we want to do on this machine. It is detecting the EGA, things like that, detecting our parallel and serial ports. Everything looks good here. Let's go over to benchmarks, and let's benchmark the main system. And as you can see here, 15.48. I mean, I guess that rounds down closer to 15 megahertz rather than 16 megahertz, but it's 16 megahertz. There's our EGA video, not bad. And then our math coprocessor. It is an ITT. It just detects it as a 287. And we're getting 704.5K whetstones for the math coprocessor. And for the CPU, we're getting 3,946 dry stones. And it looks like it puts it on the level, actually, of about, well, that doesn't make any sense, but it's saying it's about on the level of 20 megahertz 386. That doesn't really make too much sense, I don't think, but whatever. Now let's go out of this, and let me hit the turbo button, or the D-turbo button, and then let's run that again. And now we're getting 8 megahertz. So it down, our turbo function seems to downclock us from 16 to 8. That's pretty cool. It like halves the speed. So that's more of a standard AT, like IBM AT. It's kind of 286 speed. That's fine. And yeah, it goes down to 1,939 dry stones and 515.K whetstones for the math speed. So that's a pretty significant deturboing there. So that is pretty nice. Of course, games that really want like an 8088 will still run too fast, but that's still a decent deturbo if we have some games that are just running a little too fast. So speaking of that extended memory, or the EMS memory that I had set, and I said I didn't have any drivers for it, I just solved that issue, and I will show you guys here the process in a minute. So here we are, it's posting. We just saw it count up to about 3 megabytes. Now we saw in the BIOS I had set aside 1 megabyte for, I think it was the EMS memory, but of course I didn't have drivers. Focus. Okay, so see, it's counting up here, the memory. So to get that memory working, what I did is I had to download this file, found it on the internet. It is ht12mm.sys. So certain motherboards that have the Headland chipset, they will support this ht12mm.sys driver. So I made a directory called driver, and then I transferred from a floppy disk from my Windows 10 computer. Then I just transferred this file into my drivers folder on my 286 here. And then I went in and I edited, this is my config.sys file, and at the very top I put this line in, device equals C, drivers. So this is pointing it to that folder, the drivers folder, and it's going to run that program that I transferred. This is the driver, the ht12mm.sys, and when you put that in there and then you save it and restart, it counts up and it sees it. So if you have a machine similar to this and you get the driver and you put this line in and it's still not working, remember your BIOS has to support it as well, like mine does. Make sure you go into your BIOS and then allocate how much memory you want to put towards the EMS memory. In my case, I just threw 1 megabyte at it. And then we'll double check things in Check It. There we go, everything checks out. Just puns. Go into configuration, and as you can see right here, it sees our there's our conventional memory, our base memory, and then we have the 2 megabytes of extended memory, and then we have our 1 megabyte of expanded memory. So it is seeing it now. How much use any of that memory is going to be, who knows, but it gives me a warm feeling knowing it's there. So let's take a look at it in action, and let's look at some games running on this guy. This setup, however, is not fully EGA compatible. There are some games that have some issues. There's probably a number of later EGA games that could really benefit from some more CPU power. And there's also games like this one here, this is Commander Keen 4, that obviously have the choppy scrolling issue. This issue is probably going to affect some of the other later Keen games, as well as Dangerous Dave, and a couple games like that use the smooth scrolling programming. I don't remember what it's called at the moment, but this is even an issue with some VGA cards. So I have tried going into the options and putting on the smooth scrolling option, and unfortunately it doesn't do anything as far as helping. After looking into it, there is actually a full thread on Vogons about this very issue on EGA cards, and it appears there might be some early versions of the game that will work without scrolling issues, and there seems to maybe be some patches out there that fix the issue. I'm not going to go so far right now as to look into adding or trying one of those patches. It also seems it might depend on your EGA card. Some EGA cards might not have the choppiness issue. It's kind of like the same situation with certain VGA cards have the choppiness issue with this game, and some do not. So yes, there is that. It is not fully EGA compatible, despite having an EGA card. And as I said, some games could probably use some extra horsepower from the CPU, would probably benefit from that as well. So that is my sort of high-end 286. I've kind of finally built the 286 I've always wanted. I've always just wanted a 16 megahertz 286, and for some reason it has always eluded me. Now the DTK, and if you haven't watched that video for the DTK 286, I didn't make it too long ago. It's a good video. I'd watch it. A lot of the parts that end up in this machine are from that machine, and I do really like that machine, but like I said, it had a few very minor sort of drawbacks. And this machine pretty much fixes all of those. And despite a couple little issues that still need ironing out on this machine, I still very much like it. I didn't like this setup at first, how this case is so small, like the monitor is just as wide, and I kind of thought it looked really goofy at first, but as I've had this set up now for a week or so, I kind of like it. It's grown on me. This is probably going to be a permanent setup. There's just a lot of EGA games out there, and a lot of games that will run great on this. And yeah, I know, right out of the gate, probably someone is going to comment, but building a high-end 286, that would be VGA. VGA would be the high-end, and I know, and I guess that's correct. As a matter of fact, I initially used a VGA card in here for testing and setup until I was ready to put the EGA card in. And things like this EGA monitor are very rare and expensive. I get it. But for me, I want a dedicated EGA setup with an EGA monitor and an EGA card. So, but keep in mind, if you want to use a VGA card and a VGA monitor, it's much more accessible, it's much cheaper, and VGA cards, they're probably like virtually 100% backwards compatible with the EGA standard and EGA games. You might maybe run into a few very minor issues, but a VGA card is practically 100% compatible or backwards compatible with EGA and EGA games and whatnot. So I guess my point is, if you want to build a machine like this and put a VGA card in there instead of an EGA card, that should work great. So that is an option that you could do. But for me personally, I'm going EGA all the way. I love having an actual EGA monitor set up. I don't know, I just think the 286 is underappreciated in the retro gaming community, and there's a lot of good arguments against it. I mean, really, yeah, you're probably better off with a 386. There's nothing a 386, can't do, or there's nothing a 286 can do that a 386 can't do. I mean, there's a couple speed-sensitive games that you'd rather run on a 286, but it's not a big deal. You really don't need a 286 in your collection, but I don't know. They've just always had a weird appeal to me, and I think they're a little underappreciated. And You don't need one for like a strictly EGA game setup. A 386 would fill that role just fine, more or less, but I don't know, it kind of gives it a purpose, and I always like giving these old machines purposes, and I don't know, I just like it. I guess I don't have to justify it, but maybe I'm trying to maybe get some of you to justify it, so maybe some of you will put together a cool 286 setup, but yeah, I really like this machine. It's a shame that EGA monitors are so hard to come by these days, because even you viewing it through the camera and then with the YouTube compression and stuff, it does not get across how good this thing looks. I just love the look of running actual EGA games through an EGA card on an EGA monitor. There's something special about it, even though you could pretty much completely emulate the experience other ways. Just doing it with the actual hardware, there's just something special about it. That's an entirely different debate. But yeah, I just really like this machine. If you have any comments or suggestions, if you know what's going on with this drive, I mean, I seem to be able to install games just fine, so I guess it isn't that big of a deal, but it is a little bit annoying when I'm like switching discs and it's being goofy. But other than that, it seems to be running just fine. So yeah, I really like this setup, and yeah, I will see you in the next video, and thank you again for watching.